All right, welcome to another edition of the Tundra podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, none other than Cody Battershill of Canada Action, here to talk about all of the opportunities and the positive things going on in our industry. Cody, welcome to our show.
Hey, Eric, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Fantastic. So I know a bit about your background, and you started out in real estate. How did you decide to go into battle? Because this is not an easy fight. What made you do it?
Oh, it's a marathon. You know, sometimes when I realize it's 2020, it's just crazy to me because I started this interest in 2010. It's been a whole decade. I'm still actually a realtor, and I started in real estate in 2004. And I had seen a lot of my clients that were working in the energy industry. They were working in the resource industry, or they were tied to the resource industry indirectly. And I noticed that there was a lot of messaging that we started to see 2008, 2009 against Canadian pipelines and Canadian oil and gas. And then what really did it for me was I was in Vancouver in 2010, and I saw Lush Cosmetics with a big campaign to stop the tar sands. And they called it the world's most destructive project, but there was no facts, there was no context, there was no perspective, there was no conversation about how the world works, other suppliers, our record, a lot of these important aspects of the conversation. And so it piqued my interest as to, what was going on. I looked into that campaign and I realized there's a bunch of these well-funded, well-organized, quite sophisticated activist groups that were calling for a shutdown of the Canadian energy industry, and they were not doing the same thing anywhere else on Earth. And it to be honest, it really bothered me. It kind of pissed me off, to be honest, because the one client that I remember the most vividly, his name was Mike. And he had moved from Quebec, where he lost his job in pulp and paper. And he had moved, and when he took possession of his home, he was crying when I gave him the keys because he never thought he would ever be able to buy a home for his family. And he was able to move from Quebec to Alberta, work in the oil sands, long shifts, away from his family, but he was able to provide. He was able to buy a home. And that really touched me emotionally. And seeing this campaign from Lush Cosmetics, I just decided I wanted to get involved. I wanted to add some context or some facts to the conversation.
Nice. So for those who don't know, what is Canada Action?
Well, Canada Action is the outcome of that initial passion, and we are a nonprofit. We are a nonpartisan, independent, pro-resource advocacy group, and we are trying to asking people to join us for a balanced and constructive conversation about Canada's natural resource industry, our energy industry, our renewable industry, our ag, forestry, mining industries. And, there's so much negativity out there against Canadian resources, and we really wanted to provide some balance and some positivity to help rebalance the equation, to find equilibrium again. And really to help Canadians be proud of our record. Our actual environmental record is something that we are always striving to improve, but it is something that we can currently be proud of, the progress and the improvements and the collaboration that they're undergoing and continually on a road to improvement. So we're proud of all of our resources, from oil and gas, oil sands, LNG, renewables, hydro, wind, solar, geothermal, tidal, nuclear is very important, I think, for the future, as well as mining, forestry, ag. Our farmers are feeding us and the world. We are building, powering, and feeding the world with our resources, and we're quite proud of our record. So we're trying to ask people to join us and be a part of this positive, respectful, nonpartisan, inclusive conversation, including all energy and all resources.
So talking about this record that we should be proud of, could you maybe expand on that a little? What does this record look like? Because every time I turn on the news, I don't see positive messages coming. I see the oil spills, I see the negativity, and the conversation, like you said, it does feel a little imbalanced. Could you maybe expand on what we could be proud of as an industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, starting out with Lush Cosmetics saying that the tar sands or the oil sands were the world's most destructive project, you need to quantify and add context to a statement like that. Because when we look at northern Alberta, where the oil sands are located, biodiversity is about 85-90%. Southern Alberta, with agriculture and our densely populated urban centers, biodiversity is about 50%. So there are some stark contrasts between these metrics or these measurements of the environment. And the conversation for the last 10 years has been that Canadian oil is somehow uniquely dirty, not needed, and or is destroying the environment in a way that is beyond all other producers, and that Canadian oil should be, shut down and should not be a part of the global energy mix. And none of that could be further from the truth, because we have been one of the only top jurisdictions, oil reserve jurisdictions in the world with carbon pricing since 2007, as an example. We are still the only top supplier of oil to the U.S. with carbon pricing initiatives. We're a leading producer in reducing methane and flaring. If you took our standards and applied them around the world, you would actually take 100 million cars equivalent off the road of methane emissions and overall emissions. And there's so many other great statistics, and it's not just in oil and gas, it's also in mining, it's also in forestry, it's also in ag. Right now there are protests against hydroelectric transmission lines from Quebec into the U.S. Eastern Seaboard, and we know that our hydroelectricity is among the cleanest, most reliable, lowest cost producing source of electricity in the world. And, that can help potentially displace coal or even natural gas electrical supply in the U.S. And so we just have to get back to balance. And, what we often see is a tailings pond. And the tailings ponds, industry needs to continue working hard to address some of those challenges. But industry has been spending billions of dollars on this issue. There is progress that is being made. We need to continue to try to make that progress faster and better. But I think in Canada, our energy industry has really addressing a lot of the issues that do exist here and all over the world. And, when we look at that and we look at how we compare and how we rank, I think we do really have a record we can be proud of.
Very interesting. Now, in a world, let's just role play here. Hear me out. Let's say we do shut down the Canadian energy sector. What does that world look like, and what would be replaced by it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we do have to think about substitution, because, people that are protesting oil and gas in Canada, there is the reality that those same people are not opposing pipelines and oil tankers that are arriving in Canada from other countries. So we already know what would happen, because it's already happening. We have shut down, for example, the Energy East pipeline. That would have connected Western Canada to Eastern Canada. And that would have also meant upgrades in refining and upgrading capacity at 3 Eastern Canadian refineries. So we shut that down, and that would have helped Eastern Canadians get more Western Canadian oil and gas, oil specifically. So we have been importing oil from all over the world, especially from Saudi Arabia, the US, all these other countries. It's something like, it's a couple $100 billion just in the last 20 years of oil imports. And then when we wanted to get Canadian oil to New Brunswick recently, we actually had to send a tanker from British Columbia through the Panama Canal and up the East Coast. Like, crazy that we aren't connected as a country and that we're not truly energy independent or energy secure. And so if we were to shut down all Canadian energy production, we would be immediately likely facing a severe energy crisis, where we would be scrambling to buy the oil and natural gas that we consume from the US and from other countries. And there have been a number of other countries that have supplied Canada over the years. And so we would be desperately hoping that we could buy from them at any price the energy that we need to keep the lights on, to keep our homes heated, to keep our vehicles, agriculture, shipping, moving, and all the other variety of uses that are derived from petroleum products. Our petrochemical industry is one of the larger in the world, and larger sort of sources of petrochemical feedstock and refining in that sense for plastics and for a bunch of other products. So we would be replacing all of that with other countries who typically and often do not have the same ESG, environmental, social, and governance rankings, standards, or focus, and who often do not have the same climate commitments or the same track record of improvement, progress, collaboration, transparency, and of course, worker safety, social progress, equality, and all of the other societal impacts, as well as, of course, the governance, good governance around good governance and a lack of corruption. So there are a lot of implications. The biggest one would be probably no gasoline and or large, long lines for filling up our cars, and potentially other severe shortages and or issues. And it wouldn't help the environment, it would help other producers. And that's what's happened by blocking Canadian pipelines and preventing Canada from being a meaningful source of oil and gas supply for the world, which continues to buy from other countries, just like we would if we were to shut down our industry completely. So it's kind of a shocking predicament to think about, and something that we need to continue to, I think, work on as a country to overcome some of these challenges with infrastructure.
Right. Now, there's no question that the uptake in renewables and electric vehicles and the overall electrification of our economy, which is underway, I'm curious to get your take. Is this an and or an or conversation, and where does Canada Action stand on renewables?
Well, we need to have an inclusive conversation about all energy sources. So just as we are supporting renewables, we need to also support oil and gas. We need to also support uranium mining, for example, because that's the feedstock for, of course, emission-free long-life nuclear power, which is potentially a good backstop for intermittent renewables. But we are 100% supportive of wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, tidal, you name it. This is an and conversation. All of the above is needed. When we look at current global consumption of energy, you see all of it is being used. Now you see that oil and gas and even coal around the world is still a far larger share, but wind, solar, renewables have been growing. We have a record in Canada that we can truly be proud of, and it baffles my mind that more of the environmental groups don't talk about this. They're not proud of this, I guess, or they're not at least sharing this with people, but we are in fact 9th in the world for installed wind capacity, which is crazy because we have like the 38th largest population. So, and you think about having such a large population at such a cold climate, and then such large population distribution with low density. So these are really amazing statistics. We're also, again, 9th in the world for installed solar capacity. Solar in Canada. It's crazy, but we are. And a leading jurisdiction on the Clean Technology Index. We're 4th in the world on the Clean Technology Index. Again, something we can be very proud of. We get one of the largest shares of our electricity from non-emitting sources, the bulk of that being hydroelectricity, and then nuclear, and then wind and solar also contributing. About 80% of our power is non-emitting, no emission. That's huge. And there's all these other great statistics and stats and stories. I mean, Alberta, for example, we had Canada's first wind farm in 1993 in Alberta. Something we can be proud of. We're also currently building the largest wind and largest solar facility in Canada right now. And by 2025, we could have the most capacity for some of these projects. In North America, the size of these construction projects in Alberta right now is huge. So something we can really be proud of. Also, the integration of our oil and gas industry, supporting, funding renewables in many instances, also biofuels, also renewable natural gas, also all these other opportunities. And lastly, carbon capture and storage. We have 2 of the largest facilities in the world are in Canada, specifically in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Alberta is tied to the Quest Oil Sands Upgrader. And then in Saskatchewan, it's tied to the Boundary Dam coal-fired power plant. We also have a producer in Alberta that could be the world's only net negative emitter of carbon because of the sequestration that they are doing for carbon enhanced CO2 enhanced oil recovery. So there's so many great aspects of the conversation that we should be talking about. It's definitely an and, because we need all of it. And we'll see how the world, how solar and wind grow. But certainly we're going to need oil and gas for a very long time. And I think the other aspect that's lost is that you need hundreds of tons of steel, cement, plastic, copper, fiberglass, all of these raw materials, often made possible thanks to obviously mining, but also oil and gas, to make a solar farm and a wind farm, to install them, to maintain them, to service them, to then eventually take them down and put new ones up. So, everything we all need to work together. It's not about oil versus wind. It's about solar and gas, oil and wind, hydro and natural gas power. It's about an and conversation 100%. We need to get back to the middle, talking to each other, working together on these solutions, but we can't pit wind against oil and solar against gas. That's not going to help Canada or help the global environment.
Wow. So there is no question we are in a very divided time. And it feels like you're in one camp or you're in the other. And I would be curious to hear from you what tips or tricks you could suggest our viewers to engage in these conversations. When someone is 100% renewable or 100% oil and gas, how can we have these conversations in a civil way where we both walk away better?
Well, I think the more people learn about our history about human history, I think the better, because all of these remarkable advancements in technology, in the internet, in flying, in food, crop yields, all of these things are relatively new. You think about how our grandparents' parents lived 100 years ago, and it was totally different. My grandma grew up on a farm with no electricity, no water, and she's like, she's recently passed, but she's like one of my best friends. And hearing the stories about how life used to be, when she was a kid, when she was growing up, it's remarkable how far we have come. And so I think history is very important. I think reading is very important. There's a great Canadian author, Vaclav Smil. He's at the University of Winnipeg. He's Bill Gates' favorite author. That says something. And he writes about the materialization of our world, how the internet is made possible, how energy systems work, how the power density of oil versus other forms of energy. He talks about all these amazing, interesting things. And I think at the end of the day, the more people learn, the more people are open to hearing other ideas, other viewpoints, the more we can all accept that every single thing human beings do has an environmental impact. Everything. Wind has an environmental impact, oil has an environmental impact, farming has an environmental impact, our cities have an environmental impact, air traffic around the world is more emissions than all of Canada as a country. The data centers that are currently making this podcast possible, more emissions than all of Canada, double the emissions of Canada, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of buildings filled floor to ceiling with computers to make the internet possible, social media possible, to make our life as we know it possible. And all of that comes from the earth. So when we talk about impact, I think taking personal responsibility, recycling, choosing to video conference versus drive to meet someone for a meeting, choosing to go on a local vacation versus a further, vacation, buying local, that kind of slow food movement. There's a lot of these things, but we still have to, understand that we have this emotional desire to always improve, to protect the environment, to create a great future for our children. But if we think back 100 years to what life was like without a lot of these resources in the abundance that we have today, we also have to measure that. How do we live? And what are we willing to live with or live without? And how will it work with technology? So I just encourage people to always live in abundance. The glass is half full, and let's fill it up. And let's read a book from a different author or on a different point of view or a different, I have read a bunch of books from some of the biggest opponents of oil and gas in Canada, and Naomi Klein, for example, she writes a bunch of books, and there's all these other perspectives. But at the end of the day, if we can try to find some common ground, if we can respectfully agree to disagree on certain things, sure, but we got to look at other viewpoints. And I think when we do that, I've tried to do that. I think when we do that and we're honest, we're going to come back to this understanding that, yes, we can always improve, but Canada's record is already something that we can truly be proud of. And that's why, I try to push myself off of this idea, but I can't seem to do it. The world needs more Canadian insert blank, because we are truly at the cutting edge. Our resource sector is tech forward in everything we do. And we have to, as Canadians, understand that it supports our quality of life. It's a positive force for change and for good in the global environment. And progress is the name of the game in Canada. So I think we just got to live in abundance, never get into these arguments or these fights, especially online. And if we are in a position where we have engaged with someone in a discussion, as soon as that discussion gets off sort of focus around the actual facts, then I think it's just good for people just to kind of sign off and say, you know what, I'm not going to argue with you about something totally separate. You haven't addressed the factual statistic that I just gave you. We all know 1 + 1 = 2. If you're trying to say otherwise, there's really nothing else for us to talk about. So, I think living in abundance, positivity, so important nowadays. We got to fill our glasses up, not drain them down.
I love it. Now, you mentioned a couple blanks. The world needs more Canadian blank. What are some of those blanks?
Well, I think Canadian ingenuity, Canadian innovation, Canadian tech, Canadian renewables, Canadian renewable natural gas developers, Canadian wind, and solar expertise, Canadian oil and gas expertise, Canadian oil and gas, period. But all of our resources, more Canadian forestry. We are a leader in sustainable forestry practices. Something like 40% of the world's certified sustainable forests are in Canada. We plant 1 for 1. Every tree that's harvested, a tree is planted. And there's always challenges. There's always ways we can continue to improve. There's always ways that we can work with local communities, work with some of these very passionate people about the environment to find a path forward. But the path forward has to be about how we move forward, rather than shutting everything down and preventing us from making progress and preventing us from actually making any movement. Mining. Mining is huge. We are home to 14 of the 19 minerals required to make a solar panel in Canada. And we have a huge untapped resource of rare earths, of nickel, of all of these building blocks for electric vehicles that we know are going to get more and more and more important. But when we talk again about the environmental impact, there's no free lunch. It takes about 500,000 pounds of earth to make an electric vehicle battery that will drive 100,000 miles. So you're talking 5 pounds of earth mined to drive 1 mile. So and we can't even think about, I've toured mines, I've toured some of these different projects, and, the scale is massive, but we have to talk again about how do we mitigate the environmental impact? How do we reclaim the land when we're done? And that's a key part of Canadian mining. We have to reclaim the land. We have to have an environmental action plan in place before we even start development. These people aren't just winging it. They know, like, I'm going to develop this piece, then this piece, then this piece. And when I'm done this, I'm going to be reclaiming this and this already. It's a part of the process. We should be proud of the women and the men and the families that are a part of our resource sector, all the communities that are reliant on it. And the world needs more Canadian ag, forestry, mining, energy, expertise, innovation, ingenuity, know-how, carbon capture and storage, expertise, renewable energy leadership, clean technology leadership, tech, you name it. The world needs more of it because we're Canadians, and I think we have a great record we can be proud of.
Go Canada!
Go Canada! It is. It honestly is. It honestly is. It's a made in Canada, built in Canada, developed in Canada solution and that's why we got to work together. It's not West versus East. It's not. It can't be Quebec versus Alberta. We are all going to benefit as we all work together to develop all of our resources. LNG in Quebec, mining and hydroelectricity and other resources in Quebec, as well as all of these amazing opportunities all across the country, from coast to coast to coast. We got to support. We got to support our. I mean, really, it's fundamental to our economic prosperity, right? And it's key. It's huge, bigger than people I think even realize. And we got to get back to a position of collaboration, cooperation, working together, listening before speaking. The internet can make it hard sometimes, but we got to live in abundance and think about how Canada can be a part of the global solution, rather than saying Canada is somehow uniquely the key part of the global problem, and therefore we should be shut out of international markets and we should shut everything down, and who cares about Canadian families and the economic devastation that would result, and why should we build Keystone because the US can get oil from Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Brazil. Well, why would we want them to get their oil from those countries when we can supply it and we have leading climate, carbon, and environmental standards, just as an example? So we got to build Canada up. Work together, Team Canada. It's got to be a Team Canada movement.
I love that. So on the note of bringing folks together and coming to the table to work together to crack some of these challenges and get better, we've seen some positive developments. Good example, the Clean Resource Innovation Network, CRIN, just got funded to the tune of $100 million. They're going to be doing some incredible work. I know because I'm part of the team, and I get to be in on these meetings, and I see what they're doing, and I'm thinking this is incredible. What other positive developments are you seeing in our industry?
Well, I love that you mentioned CRIN, and I know you're involved. We're proud members of CRIN, and that's just a great organization. I love what you guys have been doing with that. And that's an example of our drive for continual improvement, innovation, the ingenuity. I think when you look at CRIN, when you also look at, we talk about oil and gas. We have been talking about oil and gas a lot more in this country because pipelines have been such an important part of the national conversation. There have been all of these campaigns to block Canadian pipelines and infrastructure. So, specifically to oil and gas, when we look at, there's also something called the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. And this is, I have not been able to find another example of competitive companies working together collaboratively, sharing intellectual property and research and innovation to lower the overall industry's footprint. I haven't been able to find anything. There are $1 billion or more of intellectual property, research, patents, scientists sharing information so that everyone can benefit. And that's one example of, how do we reduce emissions? We've seen oil sands emissions per barrel drop. We have some of the leading oil sands projects now producing a barrel of oil with lower emissions than the global average. We have a continued drive to reduce water consumption. We have solvents, and we have electrical, and we have all these other opportunities. We also have cogeneration happening with a bunch of oil sands projects, taking the waste heat from their process of generating steam and using that waste heat to generate electricity. There's so many examples. On the carbon capture side, again, there's a company in Canada taking carbon and taking CO2, pumping it underground to help it produce more oil, neutralizing and making it sort of a net negative carbon signature for those barrels. Like there's so many opportunities. I love what CRIN's doing. I love what the mining industry is doing. I love what the forest industry is doing, what the ag industry is doing. There's also a great wind company based out of Calgary, Greengate Power, and I love hearing their CEO Dan talk about how important it is that we innovate on wind, solar, and oil and gas, and that it is an all of the above conversation. I love it. He talks about the importance of Trans Mountain, the importance of Canada getting full value for our resources so that we can fund innovation like that CRIN is doing, that COSIA is doing, that all of these different parts of the energy ecosystem supply chain are doing to always reduce our footprint while creating jobs for Canadians. It's such a great story to talk about.
And one other one I want to add to the mix, Clean O2, a Calgary-based company
Yes.
that is tackling emissions from commercial heating, which is a huge chunk of our emissions.
Yeah.
And they invented a technology that can essentially extract carbon out of the exhaust stream and turn that into a valuable commodity, which is used in soaps, detergents, and a whole host of other industries.
Yeah.
It can reduce its GHG, a building's GHG footprint by up to 20%.
Yeah.
And they're working on a new version that could take that maybe even up to 50%.
Well, and you it's huge. And you make a good point talking about buildings, because again, when we hear about acting on climate and protecting the climate, and then people talk about, well, shut down the oil and gas industry. Well, upstream emissions from actually producing the barrel is very small. Producing, transporting, refining, like that's like, call it 20% of the emissions from a barrel of oil. The 80% of the emissions is from me and you and everyone when we use it. When we use it in all of these products that we would not be able to live without. Watch someone who's lost their cell phone frantically look for it. Cell phones are made from oil and natural gas. The internet is made possible thanks to oil and natural gas. Many things in hospitals, advanced medicine, transportation, airplanes, all these other things are made from oil and gas. And so we have to look at the other parts of the pie when we're talking about emissions. And you talked about buildings, right? You've got all these other sources that we can also tackle, we can also address. And Clean O2 is a great example of Canadian leadership, innovation, our people, our resources, and our record coming to the table, coming to the game, and wanting to participate and wanting to win in this challenge, this global challenge. So I love that you mentioned Clean O2. It's a great part of the conversation.
Fantastic. And if anyone's driven past the Tundra building, they would probably have seen that I Love Canadian Energy banner on our. For anyone who wants to get involved or get a banner of themselves or get some of your I Love Oil and Gas t-shirts, how can they go about getting in touch with you or just getting involved in any way that they can? So
we welcome any and all feedback, ideas, constructive criticism, comments from everyone. And you can engage with us on our social. Send a message to any of our social accounts at Canada Action. Join us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a huge part of the conversation for people that are in a professional network setting. Follow us on our other social accounts, obviously YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. People can request some free stickers on our website, and that's canadaaction.ca. You can also check out our online store, canadaaction.ca/shop. If you use the promo code Canada15, you'll get 15% off. That's a special thing just for your listeners today. And we have ag, mining, hydro, renewables, oil and gas, farm, you name it, in that online store, representing all of Canada's resources from coast to coast. It's something we can be proud of, as we've discussed. Also, we really want people to remember to live in abundance, be a part of the positive conversation moving forward, but regularly participating online, reading things, even different points of view, sometimes posting an online comment, sending a letter to the editor, always very helpful. People can sign up on our website to volunteer, to go down the rabbit hole even a little bit further if they'd like. And we do have people from every province all across the country volunteering as ambassadors for Canada Action, as ambassadors for our responsible resource industry that supports Canadian families. And people can reach out if they want to get in touch. Really, it's about the key takeaway. Give the conversation 5 minutes a couple times a week. We can all contribute 5 minutes once or twice a week to share something online, to ask people to think a little bit deeper, to share something with our networks on social media or otherwise, at the coffee shop, or wearing a shirt of your favorite resource brand to your kids' sporting events, or to the gym, or when you're walking the dog, or to the grocery store. It sparks a conversation, and it's a positive conversation that we can be talking about.
I literally love getting my mind blown. And you, sir, have successfully done that. So thank you. And thank you for doing the work that you're doing. Because I feel like if it weren't for people like you, this information might not get out.
I'm honored. I'm humbled. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate your support. I'm a big fan of yours as well. And, You know, I love that you mentioned CRIN. You know, you and your colleagues at CRIN, the work you guys are doing, the work Tundra's doing on innovation in the energy and the resource sector. It's absolutely huge. You know, this is an example of the people, the record, and the resources that we can be proud of. And I think we have a good story to tell. It's a good news story that we can continue to tell and share. So thank you so much for having me on today. And everyone can check us out at Canada Action, canadaaction.ca.
Fantastic. That's a beautiful call to action. Let's get out there and tell the beautiful Canadian energy story.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Second. Boom, dude, that was dynamite. That was dynamite. I love it. Oh, man, that was flames. Oh, man, that's going to go nuts.